Get Rich Education is brought to you by International Coffee Farms. Own your very own parcel of a Panama coffee farm today.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 38. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. You probably know that by now. With listeners in 126 world nations, it's the show with the highest return on time invested for listeners. It's the show where I help you live one of those lives where the passive income rent checks roll into your life every month. It's the show where I help you be the best version of yourself. It's the show where the host does more to describe the show before the show begins than any other show you've ever heard. Hey, I'm a real person just like you, and I'm sharing how the world is viewed through an investor's lens. Yeah, and you know, it would take a remorseless geography degree holder like me to bring you up to speed on how many more world nations this show is heard in since the last time I told you. Hey, well, on next Friday's show, we'll have a Rich Dad Advisor appearance again here on Get Rich Education. And after that, I've got a lot planned, including where I'm going to bring a mortgage loan officer right onto this show for your benefit. And, you know, I'm just going to go ahead and ask him the questions that I think you would ask him about how to get a loan for an income property, and often with as little money down as possible, and how you can position yourself so that you can get the best interest rates and loan terms. Well, so far on GRE, I've brought 3 providers for a number of different actionable vehicles onto the show, and I've featured turnkey investments on 3 different shows because I want to give you very specific information that you can act on. There's been residential turnkey property in Memphis, Tennessee on episode 9, Dallas, Texas on episode 22, and cash-flowing agricultural coffee parcels in Panama on episode 28. A turnkey property is a great option for busy people or just for people that don't want to get bogged down in the details and stresses of dealing with tenants in day-to-day management. And if you have trouble getting a loan, then maybe the turnkey coffee investment is the one for you because you don't need to qualify for any loan. So I'll keep giving you actionable opportunity like this because, you know, this isn't just all about theory. This is about application. But once you've acted on that, eventually what will happen is that you will run out of your own money for property. Yes, if you're hearing me right now, you will run out of your own money. I mean, even if you're Donald Trump or Ted Turner, everyone runs out of investment money sometime, okay? So yes, after you've tapped out buying your owner-occupied fourplex or duplex, or you've bought turnkey properties, or whatever else, the next thing you can do when you've run out of your own money is be a syndicator, all right, where you pool other people's money for a down payment for a deal that you found. So really, there's a few things that you can do when your liquidity tank runs dry. First of all, you can work more hours at your current job or take on a second job, but you're likely just trading more of your time for dollars then, so it's not the best long-term solution. Secondly, you can just stop investing for a while until you get enough liquidity again so that you can reinvest. But that could mean years between new investments, depending on your situation. Or thirdly, one of the other things that you can do is syndicate real estate. All right, where you find the real estate deal, you use the other people's money for the down payment. Say you use 25% of the purchase price of the building in the form of other people's money for the down payment, and then you use the bank's money for the remaining loan amount, the 75%. Therefore, you've used other people's money for the entire 100% purchase price. So syndication can be lucrative for you, but it is some work. I mean, it's not passive, but after you get it set up and your deal is closed, sometimes it can be nearly passive. Now, I've talked about syndication before, and I even invited you to join me at the syndication training event that I attended in Las Vegas a few months ago. Well, speaking of real people and helping you be who you are becoming, today's guest, Joe Fairless, bought rental single-family homes in Texas, and he enjoyed that cash flow, but he ran out of his own money for his next down payments, so he turned to syndication to accelerate things. Now, if you're buying turnkey property and enjoy passive income and you want to accelerate your wealth building, I brought Joe on because maybe you can see some of your future self in him, and that's why I wanted to have him on Get Rich Education for you today. Now, there is some bumpy audio on the guest's end here, but that smooths out after just a minute or two, so let's meet Joe. Today's guest is Joe Fairless. Joe's from Texas, but he's New York City based. Joe's a multifamily investor. He's also a real estate syndicator, and as a syndicator, he has raised over $1 million for real estate himself. He's also the host of the best real estate investing advice ever show. Welcome to Get Rich Education, Joe Fairless.
Thank you so much, Keith. I'm honored to be here. I'm excited about our conversation.
Joe, why real estate? And how did you happen to get into real estate?
Let's see. Whenever I started in my career, so I'm from Texas, moved to New York City. I was in advertising for the first part of my professional career, or as most college students call it, the real world. I was making basically less than minimum wage with my full-time job. When you factored in all the hours, I was working on Madison Avenue at a New York City ad agency, really prestigious job, but wasn't making any money. So investing was far from any thought in my head. It was really just about getting set up my career and survival in New York City. I eventually started climbing the ranks in advertising at a relatively faster clip. And whenever I had $1,000 to invest, I invested in a CD at my bank. I had no clue what a CD was, but I saw the interest rate was like 1 point something percent, and that was a lot better than the 0.00002% that I was making on my savings account. And I was like, all right, let me test this out. So I gave the bank my only $1,000 that I had. They held it hostage for a very long 12 months, and they returned it, and I got a profit of a whopping $18. And I was like, hold up a second. There's got to be a better way. And by the way, afterwards, I got my taxes, and they took out taxes from that $18 that I made. So I was like, this is just ridiculous. So at that point, I resolved to learn much more about investing whenever I did have money. And I read the book, Investing for Dummies. In that book, they talk about LLCs, investing in LLCs or startups. They talk about stocks and bonds. They talk about I got interested in real estate. Then I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I read, as you've read and followed on their field trips, Equity Happens, and many other books, and that set me on my path. And that's why I got into real estate, because it just made a lot of sense. I like being able to manipulate the value of properties through leverage and creativity.
That's great. So with that $1,000 investment in a CD and having your money locked up for a year, your return basically meant that you had lunch covered for the day.
This is New York City, so I had like a bagel covered for the day.
No cream cheese.
Yeah. No cream cheese, exactly.
So at some point, you probably began buying and investing in your own real estate before you became a syndicator, I would imagine?
Yes, absolutely. I ended up, when I had my advertising job, in 2009, I bought my first house in Texas because, again, I'm from Dallas-Fort Worth. So I bought my first house in Duncanville, Texas, just south of Dallas, for those of you familiar with Texas, for $76,000, put down 20%, and all in it was about $20,000 when you factor in the closing costs. And it rents for $1,100. So it was a pretty good cash flowing property. I learned a lot from that experience. My first tenant had to be evicted, and my house sat vacant for about 6 months right out of the gate. So it was an eye-opening experience and a very big learning experience for me. Ended up firing the property management company, have another property management company now, and they're tremendously effective at what they do. Would highly recommend them. And then I bought my second house a couple years later, my third house a couple years later, or maybe the next year, and then my fourth house about 4 or 5 months after that. And every house I bought more intelligently. And you would like this. I bought with more leverage and less money out of my pocket. The second house I got through a unique loan program called Home Path Loan. It's no longer available. I don't think it's available anymore, at least. Where I only put 10% down on an investment property. It cost me $81,000, so I put $8,100 down plus closing costs. That rents for $1,250. I can't remember exactly now what it rents for. And it's a nice house too. It's built in the 2000s, like 2003 or 4, I believe. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath. The other one was a 4-bedroom. And then my third house I got for it was a bank-owned property, and I paid all cash, $56,000 for it. And once I paid all cash, then I got it appraised. It appraised for $86,000. So I got all my cash back out that I put into it, put a new loan on it. And then I used that money to actually help me start my own career, my real estate investing company. And then in between my real estate investing company and my third house, I bought my fourth house with a $40,000 line of credit from a credit union.
Well, I like how you're taking cash out and moving the cash along and leveraging it into more properties and increasing your velocity of money. It's a common misconception that having excess equity in a property is a good thing. I don't see a whole lot of upside to having that. Some say, well, if you put a lot of money into a property in the form of a down payment, you'll increase your cash flow because your mortgage expense is smaller. But yeah, all you did is you went and bought cash flow.
Exactly.
So you're invested in the DFW market, and I have a history of investing in the DFW market myself in single-family rental homes. So with you being from Fort Worth, Texas yourself, now you live in New York City, but you must know the Dallas-Fort Worth market pretty well. So how would you characterize that market compared to other investor markets and just other U.S. real estate markets in general, Joe?
A solid employment base, diversified employment base. Population is busting at the seams. Real estate market right now is hot and perhaps overheated in that area. A lot of money chasing properties. A lot of hedge funds coming in, paying stupid money, quite frankly, for single family homes that don't cash flow. They just kind of break even, and that's okay for hedge funds or a very, very, very small return. The fundamentals are there, and that's why everybody's investing. It just depends on if you can find a good deal or not.
Do you fear that that's a sign that that market's getting frothy, that hedge funds and other institutional money are willing to pay a lot? I mean, I think that market's pretty resilient. So what do you think about the future prospects for appreciation there?
My homes have certainly appreciated a whole lot since I bought them in 2009, 2010, and 2011. And I think the appreciation will be there, but it's just if the supply can meet the demand. There's too much demand right now from a buying standpoint to really keep up with the supply. So there's a lot of dollars chasing fewer properties. And, I've seen it firsthand from my family members who are looking to move to and buy another place. They can sell their house for a lot, but then what do? They're going into multiple offer competition on owner-occupied homes.
That's good for you as you're able to continue to benefit from that appreciation. To me, that seems like one of the safest markets to invest in the United States. You have so many Fortune 500 companies there, business-friendly tax climate, and just so many other positive attributes. You do kind of have those higher property taxes there, maybe 3% annually as based on a percentage of what a place is worth. But as long as it produces cash flow and you're able to capture that appreciation moving on to bigger and better properties, you're probably best off staying right there where you're at.
Yeah, unless there's another market that somebody knows better based on their intimate knowledge. Because my whole thing is I think there are deals in any market, even Miami, San Francisco, and LA and New York City. It's just intimate knowledge of the local market and access to deals and that are favorable.
Now, the reason you're able to hold on to a lot of these properties is it sounds like after having to kiss a frog and have the wrong property manager for a few months, you found the right manager, and that's what allows you to hold on to these properties and increase what I talk about all the time, your ROTI, your return on time invested. Presumably you're using little, none of your own time because you have that right manager. Why do you have the right manager? What makes the right property manager?
First and foremost, responsiveness. Open line of communication.
Yeah.
That tells me when they're responsive and they have an open line of communication that I'm a priority. If I'm a priority, then it's likely that my property is a priority, and then that has a significant trickle down effect to the results that the property generates from an income standpoint. So that's the number one thing. Are they responsive? Now, how the heck do you gauge that before you hire them? That's a trickier question, and I don't know if I have an answer to that. What I can say is from my experience speaking to people who work with that company and always going in through a referral so that you're not a stranger to them.
Right.
When you go in through a referral, then it's not just you on the line, your relationship with them, it's the person who introduced you's relationship with them too. It's power in numbers, and at that point, you really get the best service.
Yeah, I think both you and I do a pretty good job of networking, Joe. So if you have someone in your network that already has 40 units with that property manager, and that person with 40 units introduces you and the manager, it's not just you on the line. It's now that manager wants to keep a good reputation with the one with 40 units, so they're probably going to take pretty good care of you.
Exactly.
You're listening to Get Rich Education. My guest is Joe Fairless. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Through Get Rich Education and International Coffee Farms, you can own your own half-acre parcels of a passive income-generating coffee farm in Panama for as little as $12,000. It's a low-risk opportunity with an average annual return projected to be 13 to 15%. The farms are professionally managed for you on a turnkey basis, and you own the land. And you can give as well as receive by helping International Coffee Farms create good jobs that pay a living wage and provide medical, pension, and other benefits to very poor Panamanian coffee farm workers and their families, often for the first time in their lives.
This is Cashflow Diaries Jay Massey. Do the right thing, then do things right. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold.
Well, Joe, so obviously you found out what real estate could do for you when you bought your own properties, and it sounds like you wanted to buy more, but at some point, everyone runs out of their own money, and they need to deal with other people's money, not just for the bank loan, but other people's money for both the bank loan and the down payment, and that's when people get into syndication. So what made you want to get into syndication? Is that the reason, or was there something else at work there?
That's the reason. I was in advertising. I had a good job, had a good W-2 to show to get approved for loans. And then once I left the advertising industry, I didn't have ability to get a loan anymore. So I had to get creative. It forced me to be resourceful on the financing standpoint. And so I started studying syndication. And all syndication is, for anybody who's not familiar with it, like me, whenever I started, anybody listening to the show has likely participated in a syndication. And a syndication is simply, think about an airplane. When the passengers, when you fly on an airplane, you pay a little bit of money to participate in a larger experience, flying a plane that likely not everybody and most people cannot afford a plane, so you pay a little bit of money to participate in the experience, and it takes you from point A to point B, or it accomplishes the objective that you're looking to accomplish. Same thing with real estate. You buy a building, something that you might not be able to afford on your own, with multiple people. You use some of your money, and it accomplishes, or it should accomplish, an objective, in this case, a financial objective of reaching from going from where you're at now to where you want to be. That's all syndication is. And I learned that. I studied it. I had a couple consultants. I read books. And I realized that in order for me to scale my business, in order for me to scale my personal real estate portfolio, I needed to start learning how to raise money. And so I did.
That's great. And I imagine when it comes to raising money for deals, also known as syndication, the first one's got to be the most difficult because you don't have any track record of raising money for deals. So how do you overcome that? I mean, you've got to get people, maybe complete strangers sometimes, to trust in you so that they invest their money with you over the long term. Like, how do you get anyone to believe in your mission, Joe?
Well, not only had I not raised any money, but I had never bought a multifamily property before. I ended up raising money for a 168 unit deal. So
huge.
Yeah, so there was a learning curves on multiple fronts, and how you raise money. And another point is, I highly doubt anybody who raises money for the first deal will raise money from strangers. It's likely going to be from people you know and people who know people you know. So 1 to 2 degrees of separation. Once you get past that, then you get into, well, why would I put money into your venture whenever I don't know you and you don't have experience? So when you raise money, first you've got to have credibility. So you establish credibility by aligning yourself with team members who have more experience than you. It's that simple. So I had a consultant that I brought on board. I also had a property management company that had the experience that I can say they've managed similar properties in this market and they have had success doing so. I'm not going to be the one that's on the ground managing it. I'm managing the management company. So let's look at the local partner. And then, by the way, here's some case studies that you can look at to see what they've done that are very similar. So there you establish credibility with your investor. You also have to have trust. And trust is not going to come overnight. Trust comes by being with somebody over a period of time. You can establish trust faster if you have more experience, but people who are just starting out, they don't have that experience. Therefore, the trust factor is likely going to come from just simply time with somebody. So how I did it is I raised money from 12 different people who have known me throughout my life in advertising, in people from Texas I'm on the alumni advisory board at Texas Tech. I went to Texas Tech, so people on the board with me, a guy on my flag football team. I'm the captain of my flag football team in New York. I mean, it's just all sorts of different groups. And the key is to get one person from every group that you're a part of to invest with you. That way you can say, well, so-and-so is investing, and then that established even more credibility with them, because then they're like, well, if Eric's investing, then I know Eric is very prudent with his financial decisions. So yes, let's take a look at it. I'll talk to you about it.
So I'm really hearing a couple different things here. First, since you didn't have as much experience, what you did is you networked and basically borrowed other people's experience and credibility, aligned yourself with them, and that reflected back on you, and you sort of benefited from affiliation.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I hear is, I'm sure Joe isn't going to want to say this about himself, but, Joe's proving himself to be a pretty credible, trustworthy person in all aspects of life. When you listen to the 12 people that invested with him in his first deal for a 168-unit building, they probably see what type of person Joe is like across all facets of his life. So, be a trustworthy, virtuous person. It's going to pay you back tenfold or 100-fold, listeners. So that's great. And then what about the details? I mean, a lot of people might say that they will go ahead and invest with you, but it's a little bit different when they actually write that check. So how do you get them to close with you? And then what do you do about sewing up the paperwork thereafter?
Yeah, and that actually happened to me where somebody verbally said yes. Then about 2 weeks before closing, 2 people actually backed out, and there was a $250,000 gap that needed to be closed within 2 weeks. And needless to say, similar to you with your 1031 exchange, to put sweating it out is an understatement. To put maybe crying in a corner, bawling and sobbing hysterically, maybe that's more closer to reality. To answer your question, I didn't prepare properly, but here's the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to raise money, get verbal commitments on the type of business model that you're implementing, and then go back to investors whenever you've found something that reaches their financial goals. And by the way, when you raise money for a property, raise 30% more than what you think you need, and then go back to the people who are part of that 30% of extra and tell them you're on deck should some life circumstance change with existing investors. That way you are fully covered and you can fund the deal whenever the time actually. You need to have someone sign on the dotted line at the closing table. And what I'd say about the paperwork is you have to have a private placement memorandum. You've got to make sure they're an accredited investor, and you can't do general solicitation. You've got to speak to people you know. And I'm definitely not a legal expert on this, so it's not legal advice. It's just stuff that kind of common sense stuff that I've come across. And if you're looking to do deal syndication, then you must consult an attorney who's an expert in it.
Yeah, that's a good overview. Consult an attorney. What kind of returns do you promise or state that you're going to give your investors in your syndication, Joe?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I never guarantee anything because nothing can be guaranteed in real estate.
Good idea.
The next best thing you can do is a preferred return, and a preferred return is basically in the pecking order, you're first in line to receive the cash flow. So typically, there's some sort of preferred return from 8 to 9%, and then that means the first 8 to 9% of the cash flow from the property the investor receives, and then there's some sort of split after that, 70-30, 60-40, 50-50. To the investor group, to the syndicator, and it's also called a GP, general partner, and limited partner. LP could be the investor. Just depends, different terminology. You target 20% internal rate of return over the course of the investment. That tends to be a very desirable project if you're an investor looking for a deal.
So as far as what's in it for you, the syndicator is after you've given the investor their preferred return, above and beyond that preferred return, say it's a 50-50 split, that's where that additional 50% goes to the investor and the other 50% goes to you.
Yeah, I make money three ways on these deals. First is an acquisition fee. It's also called an organization's fee. Tends to be 1 to 3% of the purchase price, and you get paid at closing. That's the compensation and reimbursement for the time to put the package together. Second is what you just mentioned, above and beyond the cash flow, whatever that split is. And then third, having equity in the property, and at the sale, getting a proceeds of the sale that the property generates after the investors reach the targeted return.
Well, Joe, you probably already confronted one of the toughest challenges for the syndicator, and that is getting the first deal under your belt. So I got to say congratulations, because now you're going to have proof of concept for future syndications.
Yeah, and I'm raising $2 million in 2 weeks for the deal in Houston. I have realized, and it's pretty much already raised, I've realized that I would never have been able to do that if I hadn't got the first one, and if I hadn't done a podcast, because all the guests I've interviewed, I reached out to a couple of them in the Houston market, and they connected me to some people, and as a result, was able to raise money.
Well, hopefully I've done that for you again today with some of my listeners, Joe. So, hey, before we wrap up, what kind of best real estate book recommendation do you have for my listeners?
I'd say it depends on what you're into, but I think a tried and true book that would be beneficial for anybody to read. I like Equity Happens. I really do. I'm sure you've mentioned on your show multiple times, but I always would recommend everybody read Equity Happens because I like the story at the beginning of The Tale of Two Investors, and I also like just the general principles of it.
That's the book Equity Happens by Robert Helms and Russell Gray, two authors that have had a significant impact in my life. I get together with them personally on their field trips. That's a good recommendation. How about a good internet resource or phone app?
Quotaful is an app that I access a lot. It's basically an Instagram of quotes that you can just look at, and you can see just different inspirational messages that people post with pictures. One of my friends actually developed that too, Nicole. It's really taken off, and I'm proud of her for it, and I use it every day.
Hey, that's fantastic, Joe. Hey, well, thanks for coming on to Get Rich Education today and providing value for our listeners.
Thank you so much.
Some nice takeaways from Joe Fairless there, a guy that's doing the thing. You can learn more about him as he hosts the Best Real Estate Investing Advice Ever podcast, or at joefairless.com. I mean, even the Wu-Tang Clan said scared money don't make money. And if you invest in a CD, you've lost liquidity for the CD term, and you're getting an interest rate that's less than the rate of inflation, most likely. Plus, you're getting taxed on that phantom gain. Now, you probably don't want investment advice from Method Man, but Joe recognized that he had some not so smart money, and he acted to find ways to start making his money smart. Not only that, but he combined it with leverage, really. I mean, leverage doesn't only need to be a term used in a strict financial sense. Even though Joe was asking investors to provide a down payment on a 168-unit apartment building, Joe had never owned any multifamily himself previously. So he leveraged his own experience as a single-family real estate investor. He leveraged other companies' experience, like demonstrating the competency of his chosen property management company to his investors. And really, he was leveraging the character that he had built in his personal community so that investors could feel like they were dealing with a trustworthy quantity. I mean, if a potential investor in your syndication doesn't know you, number one, and you don't have experience, number two, it's going to be really hard to put together a syndication. Now, if a potential investor in your deal either knows you or you have experience, well, then it's a little easier if you have one of the two. But if you have both real estate investing experience and trusting social connections with people, you're on your way. If you've got turnkey property and people in your network know that you're profitable with that, then you've got some proof of concept, and that's a tremendous tailwind, a real help toward funding your first syndication. Now, if you're seeking a relationship with a property manager, whether that's buying your own turnkey real estate investment property or building a syndication package, there is strength in numbers. If you buy a turnkey property from a combination provider manager and you tell them that you were referred from a friend that already has several properties in their management portfolio, well, that turnkey company is probably going to want to treat you even better. And if you can't satisfy that condition, you can tell the provider that you learned about them through me, and they know that I touch a lot of people, so they might have some extra incentive to treat you right. Hey, well, switching gears, here's a hot little tip for you. Key Bank is offering 100% loan-to-value cash-out refinance home equity lines of credit on your primary residence in many markets. That HELOC will likely take the form of a second mortgage on your home. You probably need to have a personal loan-to-value ratio of 45 to 50% to qualify. Some of the other big banks like Wells Fargo and Chase only offer up to 80 to 85% loan-to-value loans on primary residences, meaning that in that case you would need to keep 15 to 20% equity in them rather than zero equity if you qualify for the Key Bank product. And as always, make your own decision, and you gotta do what you feel is right for you. Hey, I was about to wrap up here, but a little while ago, I had a message come in. This message was written to me from Douglas Orr in Greensburg, Indiana, and the subject line in his message is money out of thin air. Douglas writes, "Hey Keith, I'm just so pumped I had to let you know what's been going on in my life. Before I started listening to your show last year, I bought a 3-unit house. I had a 10-year mortgage and it netted me around $800 a month. I decided that after listening to episode 6 that I needed to refinance the loan out to a 30-year loan." Hey, by the way, let me take a break from this message. Get Rich Education episode 6 has had, I think, a deeper impact on people than I thought. It's probably been the most often cited episode of any show that I've ever done. That show was titled "Here's Why You Aren't Financially Free." That show probably could have just as well been titled "The Money That You Didn't Know You Had." It seems to me like more listeners have heard episode 6, and in their mind it made them think, my gosh, I never thought of home equity and property equity in that way before. I should probably act on that, and it sounds like a lot of them are. So getting back to Douglas's message, okay, he refinanced from a 10-year loan out to a 30-year loan. reducing his payment. And then Douglas writes, after having a new appraisal, I found out that in 11 months, the house had increased in value by $20,000. I lengthened the term of the loan, took out the equity in the property, and my mortgage payment still dropped by $91. I sign on another 3-unit this Friday. It will net me around $900 a month. I used my quote-unquote free money for the down payment. Thanks for your podcast. You really have made a huge difference in my financial success. And check out this last sentence. I estimate that I will be able to quit my day job in a year and a half. Wow. And at the end, where Douglas writes his name and where he's from, he also writes his age, 27. To be able to quit your day job in a year and a half from 27, if that ends up becoming true, I mean, wow, congratulations, Douglas. You're ahead of me. That's a great message. And thanks. I mean, I can't tell you how good that makes me feel that you write that. That's why I say that on this show, I want to make you more successful than me, faster than me. And to feel like I'm doing that with Douglas and others, well, I just want to thank you so much for writing in to let me know. Again, with a little education, a little get-rich education, typically being financially free is more powerful than being debt-free. But you know, it's not always easy to put together a show like this for everyone's benefit, so it's time that I ask for something very specific in return from everyone like Douglas whom I've helped. You owe me, and that specific thing that you owe me is exactly $0. I don't need anything in return. I just love it when you let me know that I've had an impact, and that's enough of a give back right there. You could write a review for the show. I love it when listeners do that, but you don't have to do that either. Hey, well, today I want to give thanks to Joe Fairless. He's a really great guy. On next Friday's show, we continue our regular Rich Dad Advisor presence here as Josh and Lisa Lannon will be with me. It's great to have them, as the Lannons haven't appeared on many shows like this, and they're just such a class act. In fact, I'm going to tell you why, among all those well-known Rich Dad Advisor books with the purple covers, you should read the Lannons book first. It's called The Social Capitalist. It's a good thing that I got Josh and Lisa on for next week, because tomorrow, Lisa Lannon and Kim Kiyosaki are appearing at a women's financial event in London. They're going to discuss how to use good debt to build wealth. That's the kind of event that you would know about beforehand if you're on our Get Rich Education Facebook page, where we had that posted previously. Remember to catch up with Get Rich Education by following us on Facebook and Twitter. And until next week, don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.